The echo of a hammer striking stone broke the silence of the Utah desert, where Harriet Mitchell's ambitions defied the rigid boundaries that society had drawn for women in 1876. As the harsh summer sun beat down upon her wide-brimmed hat, beads of sweat trickled down her neck while she carefully extracted a specimen from the red rocks of Moab, a sight that would have scandalized the townsfolk had they witnessed a woman performing such unladylike work. "Fascinating," Harriet whispered to herself, rotating the rock fragment in her palm. At 26, she should have been tending to a household, raising children, or at the very least seeking a husband according to her father and everyone else in Moab. Instead, she found herself crouched beside the crimson cliffs, her journal filled with careful notations about sedimentary layers and mineral compositions, questions that consumed her thoughts more than any prospective suitor ever had. She tucked the specimen into her satchel alongside others she'd collected throughout the day. The heavy bag was evidence of her rebellion, a collection of stones that told a story no one else in Moab seemed interested in hearing. Scientific journals arrived by post from Philadelphia and Boston, hidden between recipe books and ladies' magazines, feeding her hungry mind with knowledge forbidden to someone of her gender. A distant cloud of dust caught her attention. Harriet tensed, quickly gathering her tools. Few travelers ventured this far from town, and those who did rarely welcomed the sight of a woman alone in the wilderness. She'd heard enough lectures about propriety and had no desire for another. As the rider approached, Harriet stood her ground, one hand gripping her rock hammer, both her scientific tool and, if necessary, a means of defense. The figure atop the chestnut horse materialized from the dust, revealing a man whose appearance matched the rugged landscape itself. He pulled his horse to a stop several paces away, studying her with the same careful observation she typically reserved for geological formations. His eyes, sharp and blue as turquoise, took in her unconventional attire: trousers beneath a shortened skirt, boots covered in red dust, and hands calloused from fieldwork. "Madam," he tipped his hat slightly, voice deep yet cautious. "Ain't often I find anyone out this far, let alone a lady." Harriet lifted her chin. "I'm collecting specimens, sir." She gestured to the cliffs behind her. "These formations contain fascinating evidence of ancient seas that once covered this region." The man's expression shifted from surprise to something resembling curiosity. He dismounted with fluid grace that suggested years in the saddle. "Adam Olsen," he offered with another tip of his hat. "Cattle driver passing through to Colorado." "Harriet Mitchell," she replied, still gripping her hammer. His eyes dropped to her satchel, where the corner of a rock protruded. "You study rocks," he stated. Not a question, but an observation tinged with something unfamiliar to Harriet, not the usual mockery or concern, but genuine interest. "I do," she admitted, prepared for the dismissive chuckle or patronizing smile that typically followed such a confession. Instead, Adam Olsen tilted his head, considering her with those piercing blue eyes. "Show me what you've discovered," he said, the words so unexpected that Harriet nearly dropped her hammer. "Pardon, the rocks," he clarified, gesturing toward her satchel. "I've spent 20 years crossing this country, seeing these landscapes change from mountains to desert to plains. Never understood what any of it meant." He paused, a half-smile forming beneath his mustache. "Might be interesting to hear what someone who knows something about it has to say." Harriet hesitated, searching his face for signs of mockery. Finding none, she slowly reached into her satchel and withdrew the specimen she'd just collected. "This contains fossils," she explained, holding out the stone. "Creatures that lived millions of years ago, when this desert was an ocean floor." Adam took the rock carefully, turning it in hands weathered by sun and work. His fingers traced the delicate imprint of an ancient shell with a gentleness that surprised her. "Millions of years," he repeated, voice quiet with wonder. "Hard to imagine water where we're standing now. The earth tells stories, Mr. Olsen, if we learn to read them." He looked up from the rock, meeting her gaze. "And you've learned to read them when most women are told not to read much at all." The understanding in his voice caught her off guard. Harriet found herself smiling, a genuine expression that rarely emerged during her interactions in town. "My father says I'm wasting time that should be spent finding a husband," she admitted, surprising herself with her candor. Adam handed the rock back to her, his fingers briefly touching hers. "Seems to me there's more than one way to build a life worth living." The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the red rocks in even deeper crimson hues. Harriet suddenly realized how long she'd been away from town. "I should return before dark," she said, reluctantly packing away her specimens. "I'm headed toward Moab myself," Adam offered. "Would be proper to escort you if you don't mind the company." Under normal circumstances, Harriet would have declined. Her independence was hard-won and fiercely guarded. But something about Adam Olsen, the respect in his eyes when he examined her specimens, the absence of judgment in his questions, made her nod in acceptance. "I'd appreciate that, Mr. Olsen." As they walked together, leading his horse behind them, Adam asked questions about the landscape that no one had ever bothered to ask her before. With each answer she provided, Harriet felt something unfamiliar bloom within her chest, the rare pleasure of being understood. The town of Moab appeared in the distance, its handful of buildings nestled against the dramatic backdrop of red cliffs and the distant La Salle Mountains. As they approached civilization, Harriet felt the familiar weight of expectation settle back onto her shoulders. "Where are you staying in town, Mr. Olsen?" she asked as they reached the outskirts. "Haven't decided yet. Any recommendations?" "Mrs. Turner's boarding house is clean and her cooking is excellent," Harriet offered, "though she'll talk your ear off about her 5 unmarried daughters." Adam laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "I've been warned then." They paused at the edge of town. The moment of parting arrived too quickly. Harriet extended her hand formally, as she would to any new acquaintance. "Thank you for your escort, Mr. Olsen." He took her hand, but instead of shaking it, he held it for a moment longer than propriety dictated. "Thank you for the education, Miss Mitchell. I hope our paths might cross again during my stay." As Harriet walked the remaining distance to her father's home, she found herself hoping the same thing, a dangerous thought for a woman who had built her life around the study of something far more reliable than the hearts of men. The Mitchell home stood near the center of Moab, a modest 2-story structure that housed the town's only doctor, her father, and his spinster daughter, as the gossips were fond of saying. Harriet entered through the back door, hoping to clean the dust from her clothes before encountering her father. The kitchen was empty, but voices drifted from her father's study. Harriet recognized the stern tone of Reverend Wallace, a frequent visitor whose primary mission seemed to be reminding her of woman's proper place in God's order. "Unnatural interests that distract her from proper pursuits," the Reverend was saying. "Doctor, as her father, it falls to you to guide her toward a respectable path." Harriet's hand tightened on the doorframe as she listened to her father's weary sigh. "Harriet has always been different, Reverend. Since her mother passed, I've done my best, but she has her mother's curiosity and stubbornness. At 26, she's becoming a cautionary tale for the younger women in our community," Reverend Wallace continued. The Thompson boy expressed interest, a fine match that would secure her future, yet she refused him to pursue this hobby. "I wouldn't call it merely a hobby," her father defended weakly. She corresponds with professors at Eastern universities. Her observations have merit, they tell her. Women were not designed by the Almighty for scientific pursuit, Dr. Mitchell. Their minds cannot withstand such strain, leading to nervousness, hysteria, and the neglect of proper domestic duties. Unable to listen to more without revealing her presence, Harriet retreated silently to the back staircase, climbing to her room with practiced quiet. She closed her door and leaned against it, eyes shut against the familiar arguments. Her bedroom stood in stark contrast to what might be expected of a doctor's daughter. Instead of needlework and fashion plates, shelves lined with rocks, fossils, and scientific texts filled the space. Maps of geological features covered one wall, and a writing desk held her journals filled with observations and theories. Harriet changed quickly, hiding her field clothes and replacing them with a simple dress appropriate for dinner. As she pinned her hair, she caught sight of her reflection, a woman caught between worlds, belonging fully to neither. Downstairs, she found her father alone in the dining room, the Reverend having departed. Dr. James Mitchell looked up as she entered, his expression a complex mixture of love and exasperation that had become increasingly familiar over the years. "Reverend Wallace visited," he said unnecessarily. Harriet took her seat across from him. "I gathered as much." Her father served the stew that Mrs. Peterson, their housekeeper, had left before departing for the evening. "Harriet, you know I've supported your interests more than most fathers would, but the Reverend raises valid concerns about your future." "My future is my concern, Father." "Is it? And when I'm gone, who will provide for you?" The familiar argument hung between them as they ate in strained silence. Finally, Harriet placed her spoon beside her bowl. "I met someone today," she said, immediately regretting the words when her father's expression brightened with hope. "Oh." "A cattle driver passing through to Colorado, She searched for words that wouldn't sound fanciful. "He asked about my work, seemed genuinely interested." Dr. Mitchell studied his daughter carefully, "And this cattle driver has a name, Adam Olsen." Her father nodded slowly. "Well, if he's staying in town, perhaps you might invite him for dinner tomorrow evening." Harriet blinked in surprise. "Father, I barely know the man." "Which is precisely why dinner would be appropriate, supervised, respectable." He smiled gently. "And if he's expressed interest in your geological pursuits, perhaps he's worth knowing better." Later that evening, as Harriet organized her day's specimens, she found herself thinking of Adam Olsen's hands cradling the fossil she'd shown him, his questions revealing a mind more open than most she'd encountered in Moab. The prospect of seeing him again brought a warmth to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Morning arrived with clear skies promising another scorching day. Harriet dressed in one of her better everyday dresses, telling herself it was merely because she might need to make a visit to town, not because she might encounter a certain cattle driver. After breakfast, she gathered her market basket, offering to handle the shopping for Mrs. Peterson, who gratefully accepted the offer. The morning air still held the coolness of night as Harriet made her way toward Moab's small commercial district. The general store, owned by the Henderson family, served as the social hub of Moab. Harriet nodded politely to Mrs. Brown and Mrs. Cooper, who paused their conversation to assess her appearance with poorly concealed curiosity. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell," Mrs. Henderson greeted from behind the counter. "Your usual supplies today?" "Yes, please, and whatever is on Mrs. Peterson's list," Harriet replied, handing over a carefully written note. As Mrs. Henderson gathered the items, the bell above the door jingled, and Harriet turned to find Adam Olsen stepping into the store. Their eyes met immediately, and the smile that formed on his face sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Miss Mitchell," he greeted, removing his hat. "A pleasure to see you again so soon. Mr. Olsen, I trust Mrs. Turner's accommodations were satisfactory." "Very much so, though you were right about her enthusiasm regarding her daughters." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "I've been introduced to each one, along with a detailed accounting of their domestic virtues." Harriet couldn't help but laugh, aware of Mrs. Brown and Mrs. Cooper watching with undisguised interest. "They're lovely girls," she offered diplomatically. "I'm sure they are." He moved closer, lowering his voice slightly. "But they don't know why the rocks around Moab are red, which leaves them at a disadvantage in my estimation." The warmth that spread through Harriet's chest had nothing to do with the morning sun now streaming through the windows. She became acutely aware of Mrs. Henderson returning with her supplies, eyebrows raised at the sight of Harriet conversing with a handsome stranger. "Your items, Miss Mitchell," Mrs. Henderson announced, placing the package on the counter. "Thank you." Harriet turned back to Adam. "Mr. Olsen, my father has expressed interest in meeting you. Perhaps you would join us for dinner this evening, 7 o'clock. If Adam was surprised by the invitation, he concealed it well. "I would be honored, Miss Mitchell. Thank you." As Harriet paid for her purchases, she could practically feel the speculation building behind her. By noon, half of Moab would know that Harriet Mitchell had invited a gentleman caller to dinner, an unprecedented event that would fuel gossip for weeks. Outside the store, Adam insisted on carrying her packages. "May I walk with you a while, Miss Mitchell? I find myself with questions about this area that only a knowledgeable local might answer." They walked slowly through town, Adam asking thoughtful questions about the landscape that surrounded them. Harriet found herself explaining the geological processes that had formed the dramatic red cliffs and arches, words flowing easily in his company. "You speak of millions of years with such certainty," Adam observed as they paused at a crossroads. "Doesn't that conflict with what's taught in church?" Harriet glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot. "The rocks tell their own story, Mr. Olsen. I believe the Creator works in ways more magnificent than we often allow ourselves to imagine." Adam studied her face, his expression thoughtful. "A diplomatic answer. A necessary one in a town this size." She smiled slightly. "My father is respected here as the doctor. His position would be compromised if his daughter were too openly heretical. Yet you continue your studies. Some questions demand answers, regardless of the cost." Harriet took her packages from him as they reached the street where she lived. 7 o'clock, Mr. Olsen. My father is punctual." "I'll be there," he promised, replacing his hat. "And Miss Mitchell, thank you for sharing your knowledge. It's a gift rarely offered to someone like me." As he walked away, Harriet found herself wondering what he meant by "someone like me," a cattle driver, a man without formal education, or something else entirely that she had yet to discover. That evening, Harriet took unusual care with her appearance. Selecting a blue dress that her father once mentioned brought out the color of her eyes. She arranged her hair in a style more elaborate than her usual practical bun, securing it with pins adorned with small pearl decorations that had belonged to her mother. At precisely 7 o'clock, a knock sounded at the front door. Mrs. Peterson, who had stayed late to help with dinner preparations, answered it, ushering Adam into the parlor where Harriet and her father waited. Adam Olsen cut an impressive figure in clean, pressed clothes, his hair still damp from what must have been a recent bath. He carried a small package wrapped in brown paper and string. "Dr. Mitchell, thank you for your hospitality," Adam said, shaking her father's hand firmly. "Miss Mitchell, he added with a respectful nod to Harriet. "Welcome to our home, Mr. Olsen," Dr. Mitchell replied, gesturing toward a chair. "My daughter tells me you're a cattle driver headed to Colorado." "Yes, sir. I'm delivering a herd to a rancher near Denver. Quite a journey. You must have seen much of the Western Territories." "I have indeed." Adam turned slightly, offering the package to Harriet. "A small token of appreciation for the education you provided yesterday, Miss Mitchell." Surprised, Harriet accepted the package, carefully untying the string. Inside the brown paper, she found a book, Principles of Geology by Charles Lyell. Her eyes widened as she opened the cover to find a first edition. "Mr. Olsen, this is," she began, stunned by the thoughtfulness and value of such a gift. "I spotted it at a bookseller's in Salt Lake City some months ago," he explained. "Carried it in my saddlebag, thinking I might understand it someday. After meeting you, I realized it belongs with someone who truly appreciates its significance." Dr. Mitchell leaned forward, examining the book with interest. "A remarkable gift, Mr. Olsen. My daughter's collection of scientific texts is quite extensive, but I believe this may be a notable addition." "It's too generous," Harriet said, still running her fingers over the embossed cover. "I cannot accept something so valuable from a new acquaintance." Adam's eyes held hers steadily. "Knowledge deserves to find its proper home, Miss Mitchell. The book would be wasted in my possession." The dinner that followed was unlike any social gathering Harriet had experienced in Moab. Adam spoke intelligently on topics ranging from cattle markets to politics in the territories. He asked thoughtful questions about Dr. Mitchell's medical practice and listened with genuine interest to Harriet's observations about the geological features surrounding Moab. "You have a remarkable daughter, Dr. Mitchell," Adam said, as Mrs. Peterson served apple pie for dessert. "Her understanding of the natural world would impress the professors I've encountered in my travels." Dr. Mitchell's expression softened as he looked at Harriet. "She has her mother's intellect and curiosity. Catherine was similarly determined to understand the world on her own terms." "Mother was interested in botany," Harriet explained to Adam. "She cataloged many of the plant species in this region before her passing." "Which explains your scientific inclination," Adam observed. "Though rocks seem quite different from plants." Harriet smiled. "Mother said plants tell us about the present and immediate past. Rocks tell us about eternity." After dinner, Dr. Mitchell surprised Harriet by suggesting she show Adam her collection in the small study adjacent to the parlor. More surprising still, he excused himself to review patient notes, leaving them alone though with the door pointedly left open in accordance with propriety. "Your father trusts you," Adam observed quietly as Harriet led him into the study. "He understands me," she corrected gently. Not always the same thing. The study contained glass-fronted cabinets filled with carefully labeled specimens, maps annotated with Harriet's neat handwriting, and shelves of scientific journals and books. Adam moved slowly around the room, examining the collection with evident admiration. "You've created your own natural history museum," he said, pausing before a particularly striking geode split to reveal purple amethyst crystals inside. "A poor substitute for formal education," Harriet admitted, "but I make do with correspondence courses and journals." Adam turned to face her fully. "May I speak frankly, Miss Mitchell, please? I've met university professors with less knowledge and certainly less passion for their subjects than you possess." He gestured to the room around them. "This isn't a hobby or a pastime. This is scholarship." Harriet felt a tightness in her throat at his understanding. "Try explaining that to Reverend Wallace or most of Moab." "Their loss," Adam said simply. "Though I understand the difficulty of living against expectations." He picked up a small fossilized shell, turning it carefully in his fingers. We all have paths we're supposed to follow, don't we? And yet here you are, a cattle driver who carries geology texts in his saddlebag. His smile held a hint of something she couldn't quite identify: sadness, perhaps, or resignation. We all contain contradictions, Miss Mitchell. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and possibilities. Finally, Adam carefully replaced the fossil on its shelf. I should take my leave, he said. Your father has been more than generous with his hospitality. Harriet nodded, leading him back to the parlor where Dr. Mitchell had returned. The men shook hands and her father surprised her once again. Mr. Olsen, I understand you'll be in Moab for several more days. Perhaps you might accompany Harriet on one of her geological excursions. With proper chaperonage, of course. Mrs. Peterson's grandson Timothy often assists with carrying equipment. Adam's eyes brightened. I would consider it an honor, sir, if Miss Mitchell is amenable. All eyes turned to Harriet, who found herself nodding before she had fully considered the implications. There are some fascinating formations to the north that I've been meaning to examine more closely. Excellent, Dr. Mitchell declared. Day after tomorrow, perhaps. I believe the weather is expected to remain fair. After Adam departed with promises to return in 2 days' time, Harriet turned to her father with questioning eyes. That was unexpected, she said carefully. Dr. Mitchell's smile was gentle but knowing. He's an unusual man, your Mr. Olsen. He's hardly my Mr. Olsen, father. Perhaps not, but he looks at you the way a man should look at a woman, with respect for who she is, not merely what she represents. He patted her hand. Your mother would have approved. The following day passed with excruciating slowness for Harriet, who found her thoughts repeatedly drifting to Adam Olsen. She tried to focus on cataloging recent specimens, but memories of his voice, his careful handling of the fossils, and the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled kept intruding. By evening, Harriet had admitted to herself that her interest in Adam extended beyond his appreciation for her scientific pursuits. There was something compelling about him, a depth that suggested experiences beyond those of an ordinary cattle driver, a gentleness that contrasted with his rugged exterior. The morning of their planned excursion dawned clear and promised heat. Harriet dressed in her field clothes, covered by a lightweight duster that provided some concession to propriety. Timothy, Mrs. Peterson's 15-year-old grandson, arrived early to help gather equipment. Are we really taking that cowboy to see rocks, Miss Mitchell? Timothy asked as he loaded bags into the small wagon. Mr. Olsen has expressed interest in understanding the geological formations around Moab, Harriet replied primly, though she couldn't help smiling at the boy's directness. Timothy shrugged. Ma says half the ladies in town are talking about him having dinner at your house. Miss Turner is mighty disappointed he's spending time with you instead of her daughters. I imagine she is, Harriet murmured, feeling a small, unexpected thrill at the thought. Adam arrived precisely on time, riding his chestnut horse alongside their wagon. He greeted Harriet with a warm smile that sent a flutter through her chest, then turned to Timothy with the same respect he might show an adult. Timothy Peterson, I presume? Adam Olsen. Thank you for your assistance today. The boy straightened under Adam's attention. Yes, sir, I'm strong enough to carry whatever Miss Mitchell needs. I don't doubt it. Shall we proceed, Miss Mitchell? They traveled north out of Moab, following a rough trail that wound through increasingly dramatic landscapes of red rock formations. Adam rode alongside the wagon, occasionally pointing out features that caught his eye and asking questions that revealed his growing understanding of geological processes. After an hour's journey, They reached a series of uplifted rock layers that displayed clearly visible strata in various shades of red, orange, and white. Harriet directed Timothy to stop the wagon in the shade of a large outcropping. "This is what I wanted to show you," she told Adam as they dismounted. "These layers represent different time periods spanning millions of years. You can literally see the passage of deep time written in the rocks." Adam gazed upward at the towering formations. "It's humbling," he said quietly. "Makes a man's life seem brief as a lightning flash. Yet here we are, able to read and understand what came before us," Harriet replied, unloading her equipment. "There's something profound in that, don't you think?" They spent the morning with Harriet explaining the different rock layers, showing Adam how to identify various minerals and fossils. Timothy, initially bored by the scientific discussion, became interested when Adam taught him to identify tracks left by animals that had passed through the area. As midday approached, they sought shelter from the intensifying heat beneath a natural rock overhang. Timothy spread a blanket for their picnic lunch while Adam secured the horses. When they settled to eat, Harriet noticed Adam watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. "What is it?" she asked when Timothy wandered off to explore a nearby crevice still within sight as propriety demanded. "I'm trying to understand," Adam said, his voice low and thoughtful. "Understand what? How someone like you exists in a place like this." His eyes held hers. "You should be lecturing at universities, publishing papers, being recognized for your knowledge." Harriet looked down at her hands, calloused from fieldwork and stained with red dust. "Women aren't welcome in those spaces, Mr. Olsen. Not yet, at least." "Adam," he corrected gently. "After sharing knowledge and breaking bread, I think we might use first names at least when propriety doesn't demand otherwise." She smiled, warmth spreading through her. "Harriet, then." "Harriet," he repeated, the name sounding different in his voice. "I want to know how you became you. This remarkable woman who reads the earth's secrets when society tells you to read only cookbooks and the Bible." The personal question might have offended her from another man, but Adam's genuine interest had earned her trust. Harriet found herself telling him about her childhood, about a mother who encouraged curiosity, a father who valued education regardless of gender, and a stubborn determination that refused to accept limitations based solely on being female. "After mother died, father might have remarried, found someone to civilize me," she explained. "Instead, he allowed me to continue my studies, even when the town gossips suggested he was ruining my prospects." "And what about those prospects?" Adam asked carefully. "Has there never been someone who understood your passion?" Harriet met his gaze steadily. "Until recently, no. The air between them seemed to change, charged with something electric and unspoken." Adam's expression softened, and he leaned slightly toward her before catching himself, glancing toward Timothy, who was still examining rocks nearby. "We should continue our exploration," Harriet said, breaking the moment before it could deepen into something neither of them was prepared to address. "There's a small canyon ahead with particularly clear fossil impressions." They spent the afternoon in scientific pursuit, but something had shifted. Adam stayed closer to her, his hand occasionally steadying her as she navigated difficult terrain, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. When their fingers brushed as they examined the same specimen, neither pulled away immediately. The sun was beginning its descent when they finally packed the wagon for the return journey. Timothy, tired from the day's adventures, dozed on the wagon seat while Harriet drove. Adam rode beside them, occasionally glancing at her with an expression that made her wonder what thoughts moved behind those blue eyes. "Will you be staying much longer in Moab?" Harriet asked as the town came into view in the distance. "My business concludes in 3 days," Adam replied. Then I must continue to Colorado with the herd. The answer sent an unexpected pang through Harriet's chest. 3 days. Such a brief time to explore whatever was developing between them. Perhaps, Adam continued, watching her carefully, we might have another opportunity to discuss geology before I depart. Your father mentioned a collection of journals you receive from Eastern universities. Yes, Harriet said quickly, too quickly perhaps. I would be happy to share them with you. As they reached the outskirts of Moab, Adam's expression grew more reserved, the mask of propriety falling back into place. They delivered a sleepy Timothy to Mrs. Peterson's house, then continued to the Mitchell home where Dr. Mitchell waited on the porch. A successful expedition, I trust, he called as they approached. Most educational, sir, Adam replied, dismounting to help Harriet down from the wagon. His hands at her waist were strong and sure, and for a brief moment their eyes met at closer proximity than propriety typically allowed. Father, Mr. Olsen has expressed interest in reviewing some of the scientific journals in my collection, Harriet said as they climbed the porch steps. Perhaps tomorrow afternoon. Dr. Mitchell's expression remained neutral, though Harriet detected a knowing glint in his eye. Certainly. I'll be seeing patients, but Mrs. Peterson will be here. Adam tipped his hat. Until tomorrow, then. Thank you both for a most enlightening day. As Adam rode away, Dr. Mitchell turned to his daughter with raised eyebrows. An enlightening day indeed. Your cheeks are quite flushed, Harriet. The sun, no doubt. No doubt, she agreed, though both knew the desert heat was not entirely responsible. That night, Harriet stood at her bedroom window, gazing out at the star-filled sky above Moab. Her mind replayed moments from the day, Adam's attentiveness, his intelligent questions, the brief touches that seemed both accidental and deliberate. In 3 days, he would be gone, continuing his life of movement and travel while she remained in Moab with her rocks and fossils and unanswered questions. The thought brought an ache she hadn't anticipated. Adam Olsen had entered her carefully ordered world only days ago, yet already the prospect of his departure left her feeling hollow. It was irrational, Harriet told herself, emotional rather than scientific. Yet the feeling persisted, undeniable as the red rocks themselves. Morning brought a flurry of activity to the Mitchell household. Dr. Mitchell prepared for a day of patience while Harriet arranged her study, selecting journals she thought might interest Adam. When Mrs. Peterson arrived to manage the household, she brought news that set the town buzzing. A telegram came for that Mr. Olsen this morning, she reported as she kneaded bread dough. Miss Turner says he read it and looked mighty troubled, went straight to the livery after. Harriet's hand stilled on the journal she'd been organizing. Did she hear anything about its contents, Mrs. Peterson gave her a knowing look. Only that it came from Denver, the same Denver he's headed toward, as I understand it. The information shouldn't have concerned Harriet, yet she found herself glancing repeatedly at the clock as the appointed hour for Adam's visit approached. When it passed with no sign of him, a weight settled in her stomach. Another hour crawled by before a knock finally came at the door. Mrs. Peterson answered it, returning to the parlor where Harriet waited with barely concealed anxiety. "Mr. Olsen to see you, Miss Mitchell." Adam entered, his expression grave in a way she hadn't seen before. He removed his hat, revealing hair much as if he'd been running his hands through it in agitation. "Harriet, Miss Mitchell, forgive my tardiness." His voice sounded strained. A matter of business required immediate attention. "Is everything all right?" she asked, gesturing for him to sit. He remained standing. "I've received news that requires me to depart Moab earlier than planned. Tomorrow, in fact." The announcement hit Harriet with unexpected force. "I see," she managed, struggling to maintain her composure. I trust nothing is amiss with your business arrangements. Complications have arisen that require my presence in Denver sooner than anticipated. Adam's eyes held hers, conveying something beyond his words. I regret that our time for scientific discussion must be curtailed. Mrs. Peterson cleared her throat pointedly from the doorway. I'll bring some refreshments, shall I? And leave the door open naturally. When they were alone as propriety allowed with the door wide open, Adam moved closer, lowering his voice. Harriet, there are things I need to explain, but not here, not now. He glanced toward the open door. Would you walk with me? Just to the garden where Mrs. Peterson can see us from the window but not hear every word. The request was improper enough to raise eyebrows, but not so scandalous as to be impossible. Harriet nodded, rising to lead him through the house to the small garden behind it. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the carefully tended plants that had been Harriet's mother's pride. They walked slowly along the gravel path, maintaining a respectable distance while still speaking privately. The telegram, Adam began without preamble. It wasn't merely about business. Harriet waited, sensing his internal struggle. I haven't been entirely truthful with you, Harriet. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. I am delivering cattle to Denver, that much is true, but I'm not simply a cattle driver. Then what are you? Adam took a deep breath. My father owns one of the largest ranching operations in Colorado Territory. The Olsen Ranch spans thousands of acres near Denver. Harriet blinked in surprise. You're a rancher, an heir to one, yes. I've spent years learning every aspect of the business, including driving cattle at my father's insistence. Why keep this from me? Harriet asked, confusion evident in her voice. Adam's expression grew complex. When people learn my family's position, they tend to see only that the name, the wealth, the connections. I've found it simpler to let people know me first as just a man. I see, Harriet said, though she wasn't entirely sure she did. And the urgency of your departure, his face darkened. My father is ill, seriously so, according to the telegram. He's asking for me. Oh, Adam, I'm sorry. Harriet instinctively reached out, touching his arm briefly before remembering herself and withdrawing her hand. There's more. Adam's eyes held hers intently. Before I received this news, I had already made a decision about you. Harriet's heart quickened. About me. In the few days I've known you, Harriet Mitchell, you've shown me a way of seeing the world I never imagined possible. Your intelligence, your passion, your courage in pursuing knowledge despite every obstacle. He stopped, seemingly overwhelmed by emotion. I was going to ask your father's permission to court you properly. The admission stunned Harriet into silence. Adam continued, words flowing more rapidly now. I know it's sudden, irrational perhaps. We've known each other mere days. But I've traveled enough to recognize rare and precious things when I find them. And now, Harriet asked, her voice barely above a whisper, now I must return to Denver immediately. My father. He trailed off, pain evident in his expression. But I want you to know that my feelings haven't changed, only my timeline. They stood in silence as the implications settled around them. Finally, Harriet spoke, her scientific mind asserting itself through the emotional tumult. This changes the variables considerably. A smile flickered across Adam's face despite the gravity of the moment. Indeed it does, Professor Mitchell. You're not merely passing through Moab. You're the son of a wealthy rancher returning to significant responsibilities. Yes. And I am still a woman who studies rocks when women shouldn't think. Harriet met his gaze directly. How does one reconcile these facts? Adam stepped closer, still maintaining enough distance to be proper, should Mrs. Peterson glance out the window. I have a proposition. A scientific one, if you will. I'm listening. Come to Denver. Not immediately, he added quickly, but soon. There's a natural history society there with members who would value your knowledge. The University of Colorado has begun collecting geological specimens. Your expertise would be welcomed. The invitation took Harriet's breath away. You make it sound so simple. It won't be, Adam admitted, but the most valuable discoveries rarely come easily. His expression grew tender. I'm not asking for promises, Harriet. Only a chance to explore what might develop between us in a place where your mind would be valued as it deserves. Before Harriet could respond, Mrs. Peterson appeared at the back door, her expression making it clear that their private conversation had extended beyond acceptable limits. Miss Mitchell, your father has returned. He's asking for you. Adam nodded respectfully toward the housekeeper. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I was just taking my leave. As they walked back toward the house, Adam spoke quietly enough for only Harriet to hear. I depart at first light. If you have an answer for me, any answer, I'll be at the livery stable at dawn. Dr. Mitchell was waiting in the parlor, his expression curious as Adam made his formal goodbyes, explaining the circumstances necessitating his abrupt departure. If the doctor suspected there was more to the story, he gave no indication. Safe travels, Mr. Olsen, Dr. Mitchell said, shaking his hand. I hope your father recovers swiftly. Thank you, sir. Adam turned to Harriet, propriety forcing formality into his farewell. Miss Mitchell, I cannot thank you enough for sharing your knowledge. It has been truly illuminating. The pleasure was mine, Mr. Olsen, Harriet replied, her calm voice belying the turmoil within. I wish you well in Denver. After Adam departed, Dr. Mitchell studied his daughter's face. He seems a fine man. Yes, Harriet agreed, unable to elaborate without revealing confidences, and one who appreciates your particular gifts. Harriet looked at her father sharply. You've noticed. I'm a doctor, my dear. Observation is my profession. He patted her hand gently. Whatever he said to you in the garden has left you with a decision to make. I only ask that you consult both your head and your heart before making it. That night, sleep eluded Harriet entirely. She paced her room, mind racing between rational analysis and emotional yearning. Denver. A city with scientific societies, universities, opportunities for a woman of her interests. And Adam, a man who saw her mind as an asset rather than an inconvenience, who looked at her with respect that had nothing to do with propriety and everything to do with genuine admiration. But leaving Moab meant leaving her father, the only family she had left. It meant venturing into an unknown world where her unconventional interests might find greater acceptance, but where she herself would be a stranger. And what of Adam's family? Would they welcome a woman so outside the norm, so dedicated to pursuits typically reserved for men? As the first pale light of dawn appeared on the horizon, Harriet made her decision. She dressed quickly in a simple traveling dress, then moved quietly to her father's bedroom door, tapping gently. Dr. Mitchell answered almost immediately, fully dressed as if he'd been expecting her. You've decided, he stated simply. How did you know I would come to you now? He smiled gently. Because you are your mother's daughter. She also made her most important decisions at dawn. Harriet's eyes filled unexpectedly with tears. Father, you're going to Denver, he finished for her. Not today, perhaps, but soon. How can you possibly know that? Dr. Mitchell took her hands in his. Because I saw how he looked at you, Harriet. And more importantly, I saw how you looked at him. The same way your mother looked at me when I offered her a life that her family considered unconventional. You're not angry, disappointed to lose you, certainly. Angry that you might find happiness and intellectual fulfillment. Never. He released her hands to retrieve something from his desk. I've written a letter of introduction to Dr. Samuel Wright at the Colorado Medical Society. He and I corresponded years ago on research questions. He might help you make connections in scientific circles there." Harriet took the letter, stunned by her father's foresight. "You prepared this last night." "I've raised an independent thinker, Harriet. I could hardly be surprised when she thinks independently." He smiled wryly. "Now, I believe you have a cattle driver or rancher rather waiting for your answer." The livery stable stood at the edge of town, already active despite the early hour. As Harriet approached, she saw Adam checking the saddle on his chestnut horse, his back to her. He wore riding clothes suited for a long journey, and a pack horse stood ready nearby. For a moment, Harriet paused, watching him, this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly and was about to change its course completely. The scientific part of her mind noted the improbability of it all, the variables too numerous to have predicted this outcome. "Adam," she called softly. He turned immediately, his expression transforming from surprise to something so tender it made her breath catch. "Harriet," he said, moving toward her. "You came. I came to give you my answer." She straightened her shoulders, summoning her courage. "I would like to see Denver, to explore its scientific opportunities, and—" She paused, then continued more softly, "to explore what might develop between us." The smile that spread across Adam's face rivaled the rising sun for brilliance. "When? Not immediately. My father needs time to arrange for another physician to take some of his patients, and I have research to organize, arrangements to make, of course." Adam stepped closer, still mindful of the early risers who might observe them. "A month, 2 months should be sufficient," Harriet agreed. "By then, the worst summer heat will have passed, making travel more comfortable." Adam nodded. "I'll send detailed instructions for your journey. And Harriet," he added, his voice dropping to ensure privacy, "I'll be counting every day." They stood for a moment, the promise of future possibilities hanging between them. Then, with a glance toward the stable hand who was pointedly not watching them, Adam reached for her hand, pressing it briefly between both of his. "Until Denver," he said. "Until Denver," she echoed. Adam mounted his horse with the fluid grace she'd come to associate with him. Looking down at her, his expression held certainty and promise. "The rocks have waited millions of years to reveal their secrets, Harriet Mitchell. I can wait 2 months to begin discovering yours." With that, he tipped his hat, turned his horse, and rode out of Moab as the sun crested the eastern cliffs, painting the red rocks in golden morning light. The weeks that followed Adam's departure passed in a flurry of activity for Harriet. News of her impending relocation spread quickly through Moab, generating reactions that ranged from scandalized whispers to genuine concern for her welfare. "Denver is no place for an unmarried woman traveling alone," Reverend Wallace informed her after Sunday services, his expression severe. "Particularly one going to meet a man she barely knows." "I'm going to pursue scientific opportunities, Reverend," Harriet replied evenly. "Mr. Olsen merely made me aware of their existence." The Reverend's skeptical expression made it clear he didn't believe her, but Harriet found she cared less about such opinions with each passing day. Letters had begun arriving from Denver, formal, proper letters that could be read aloud in the parlor without raising eyebrows, yet containing subtle warmth that only Harriet fully understood. Adam wrote of Denver's growth, its scientific societies, and the university that was establishing collections of natural specimens. He mentioned his father's health, which was slowly improving after a heart episode that had been less severe than initially feared. Between the carefully proper lines, his anticipation of her arrival was evident. Dr. Mitchell arranged for a younger physician from Grand Junction to take over much of his practice, introducing him to patience and ensuring a smooth transition. In the evenings, father and daughter spent precious time together, aware that their daily relationship was drawing to a close. "I'll visit," Harriet promised as they sat on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the cliffs in deepening shades of red. "Of course you will," her father agreed, "and I'll come to Denver when my practice allows. But Harriet," he added gently, "don't let concerns about me limit whatever future you might build there." As her departure date approached, Harriet carefully packed her most precious specimens and research journals. The bulk of her collection would remain in Moab until she was established in Denver, but certain irreplaceable items would travel with her. The evening before her departure, a special delivery arrived from Denver, a leather-bound journal of exceptional quality with HM embossed on the cover in gold leaf. Inside, Adam had written a brief note for recording new discoveries in a new landscape, scientific and otherwise. A.O. The morning of Harriet's departure dawned clear and cool, perfect traveling weather for early October. The stagecoach would take her first to Grand Junction, then connect to the train that would carry her to Denver. Dr. Mitchell accompanied her to the stagecoach station, where much of Moab had gathered to witness her departure. "Remember your promise to write, Miss Mitchell," Mrs. Peterson said, pressing a package of food for the journey into her hands. "Timothy wants to know if Denver has bigger rocks than Moab." "I'll send him a full report," Harriet promised, smiling at the boy who had carried her equipment on so many expeditions. Even Mrs. Turner offered good wishes, though she couldn't resist adding, "Such a shame Mr. Olsen didn't find what he was looking for in Moab," with a meaningful glance at her daughters. "On the contrary," Dr. Mitchell replied smoothly, "I believe Mr. Olsen found exactly what he was seeking." As the stagecoach arrived and Harriet's luggage was secured, she turned to her father for their final goodbye. "I'm proud of you, Harriet," Dr. Mitchell said, holding her hands tightly. "Your mother would be too. She always said you were meant for bigger landscapes than Moab could provide." "I'll make you both proud," Harriet promised, blinking back tears. "You already have." The journey to Denver took 3 days of dusty roads, crowded stagecoaches, and finally the relative comfort of the train. Throughout the journey, Harriet observed the changing landscape with a geologist's eye, noting how the red rock formations gradually gave way to the rising foothills of the Rocky Mountains. As the train pulled into Denver station on the afternoon of the 3rd day, Harriet felt a curious mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Through the window, she could see a city far larger than Moab, with substantial brick buildings, paved streets, and a bustle of activity that spoke of commerce and growth. The train slowed to a stop amidst billowing steam, and passengers began gathering their belongings. Harriet remained seated momentarily, gathering her courage for whatever awaited her outside. Then, straightening her travel-worn hat and smoothing her dress, she rose to face her future. On the platform, travelers reunited with family members, businessmen hurried toward waiting carriages, and porters called out offers to carry bags. Harriet scanned the crowd, uncertainty creeping in despite her determination to appear confident. And then she saw him, Adam Olsen, standing tall among the crowd, his eyes searching until they found her. The smile that transformed his face sent a wave of warmth through Harriet that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. As she stepped down from the train, Adam moved toward her, maintaining a respectful distance but unable to conceal the joy in his expression. "Miss Mitchell," he greeted formally, tipping his hat. "Welcome to Denver." "Mr. Olsen," she replied, matching his propriety while her eyes conveyed much more. "Thank you for meeting me. It is entirely my pleasure." He gestured to a porter who approached to collect her luggage. "I've arranged accommodations for you with my father's sister, Mrs. Alina Davis. She's a widow with a comfortable home near the university area and has offered to serve as your chaperone during your stay in Denver." Harriet appreciated both the thoughtfulness and the propriety of the arrangement. "That's very kind. I look forward to meeting her. She's eager to meet you as well." Adam led her toward a handsome carriage waiting nearby. "I may have spoken of you rather extensively." The admission brought color to Harriet's cheeks. "Have you indeed?" Extensively and admiringly came a woman's voice as they reached the carriage. A well-dressed lady in her 50s stepped down, her expression warm and welcoming. "You must be Miss Mitchell. I'm Alina Davis, Adam's aunt and your hostess, if you'll accept my hospitality." Harriet took an immediate liking to the woman, whose direct gaze and firm handshake suggested a character unbound by excessive formality. "Mrs. Davis, thank you for your generosity to a complete stranger." "Any woman who can impress my nephew with her intellect is hardly a stranger," Alina replied with a meaningful glance at Adam. "Besides, I've been involved with the Ladies' Scientific Society of Denver for many years. We're always eager to welcome new members with genuine expertise." As the porter secured Harriet's luggage to the carriage, Adam helped both women inside, then joined the driver on the front seat, a position that respected propriety while allowing Alina and Harriet to become acquainted during the journey to Alina's home. "Adam tells me you're a geologist," Alina began once they were underway. "Self-taught but with impressive knowledge." "I've studied independently, yes," Harriet acknowledged, "though without formal credentials, I'm afraid." Alina waved away the concern. "Credentials matter less in Denver than they might in eastern cities. The West is still being built, my dear, and those who can contribute valuable knowledge are welcomed regardless of conventional qualifications." She leaned forward slightly. "Particularly in scientific circles, where the natural wonders surrounding us demand more observers than are currently available." The carriage wound through Denver's streets, giving Harriet her first glimpse of the city that might become her home. Though still rough around the edges compared to eastern metropolises, Denver showed clear signs of prosperity and permanent substantial buildings of brick and stone, tree-lined avenues in residential areas, and cultural establishments that spoke of a community investing in its future. Alina's home proved to be a handsome two-story residence on a quiet street lined with mature trees. As the carriage stopped before it, Adam jumped down to assist the women. "I've taken the liberty of arranging dinner this evening," he told Harriet as he helped her down. "My father is eager to meet you if you're not too fatigued from your journey." "Not at all," Harriet assured him, though in truth she felt dusty and travel-worn. "I would be honored to meet your father." Alina linked her arm through Harriet's. "Then we shall have time for you to rest and refresh yourself before dinner." "Adam, 7 o'clock at your father's house." 7 o'clock, he confirmed, his eyes lingering on Harriet. "Until then, Miss Mitchell." Alina's home was comfortable without being ostentatious, filled with books, artwork, and curious specimens that immediately indicated her scientific interests. She showed Harriet to a pleasant guest room overlooking a small garden. "Adam arranged to have fresh water brought up for washing," Alina explained, gesturing to a porcelain basin and pitchers. "Your luggage will be up shortly. Rest, refresh yourself, and we'll depart for dinner at 6:30. Left alone, Harriet sank onto the bed, momentarily overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. She had left behind everything familiar to pursue both scientific opportunity and the possibility of a relationship with a man she'd known for mere days before his departure from Moab. The boldness of her decision struck her anew, bringing both exhilaration and trepidation. After washing away the dust of travel and changing into her best dress, a deep blue silk that her father had insisted on purchasing for her journey, Harriet joined Alina downstairs. The older woman assessed her approvingly. "You look lovely, my dear. Now, before we depart, a word about what to expect this evening." Alina gestured for Harriet to sit. "Joseph Olsen is a formidable man, self-made, proud, and used to having his way. His recent illness has softened him somewhat, but he remains protective of his family and legacy." "I understand," Harriet said, feeling a flutter of nervousness. "He must have questions about my suitability as a friend to his son." Alina's smile was knowing. "Joseph has questions about everything and everyone. But I've known him for 30 years, and I can tell you this. He respects individuals who stand their ground and speak honestly. Don't try to be what you think he wants. Be exactly who you are, the woman who impressed his son with her mind." The Olsen residence proved to be one of the finest homes in Denver, a substantial mansion set within carefully landscaped grounds. As their carriage approached, Harriet caught her breath at the scale of it, far grander than any home in Moab and clear evidence of the family's prosperity. Adam waited on the steps to greet them, handsomely dressed in evening clothes that transformed the cattle driver she'd met in Moab into a gentleman of evident refinement and position. Yet his smile remained the same, warm, genuine, and directed entirely at her. "You look beautiful," he said quietly as he helped her from the carriage. The words meant for her ears alone. Inside, the home's grandeur continued with high ceilings, fine furnishings, and artwork that spoke of cultured taste and substantial wealth. A uniformed butler led them to a formal parlor where an older man rose from his chair as they entered. Joseph Olsen's resemblance to his son was evident in his height and build, though age and recent illness had left him thinner than he might once have been. His eyes the same striking blue as Adam's assessed Harriet with undisguised curiosity. "Miss Mitchell," he greeted, his voice stronger than his appearance might have suggested. "Welcome to Denver and to our home." "Thank you, Mr. Olsen. I appreciate your hospitality, especially as you're recovering from illness." Joseph gestured for everyone to be seated. "My recovery progresses well enough, though not as quickly as I might wish." His direct gaze fixed on Harriet. "My son tells me you're a geologist from Moab. Self-educated in a field most women avoid entirely." "Yes, sir," Harriet replied, lifting her chin slightly. "The Earth's history has fascinated me since childhood. And you pursued this interest despite social disapproval." "Knowledge doesn't become less valuable because society questions who seeks it," Harriet answered, remembering Alina's advice to be herself. A smile flickered briefly across Joseph's face. "Well said, Miss Mitchell." He glanced at his son. "Adam mentioned you might be interested in connecting with Denver's scientific community during your stay." "I would, yes. I understand there are societies here that welcome those with interest in natural sciences." "There are indeed." Joseph leaned forward slightly. "Including the Rocky Mountain Geological Society, of which I happen to be a founding patron." Harriet's surprise must have shown on her face, for Joseph chuckled a sound that softened his imposing presence. "You didn't expect a cattle baron to have scientific interests?" he asked. "I hadn't considered it," Harriet admitted. "Successful ranching requires understanding the land, its water sources, soil composition, natural cycles. Early in my career, I recognized that geological knowledge offered practical advantages." He gestured toward Alina. "My sister-in-law encouraged my interest, introducing me to academics who helped establish the society 20 years ago. Father has assembled one of the finest private collections of regional geological specimens in Colorado," Adam added. a hobby that became unexpectedly useful, Joseph explained. Knowledge of mineral formations led to several profitable mining investments over the years. Dinner was announced, and they moved to an elegant dining room where the conversation continued to flow more easily than Harriet had anticipated. Joseph Olsen proved to be well-read and genuinely interested in her observations about the geological features around Moab. "You must see my collection after dinner," he told her as dessert was served. "And perhaps you'll allow me to introduce you at the next meeting of the Geological Society. They meet monthly at the university." "I would be honored," Harriet replied, hardly believing that her first evening in Denver was already opening doors she had only dreamed of in Moab. After dinner, while Alina engaged in conversation with Joseph, Adam led Harriet to a side parlor where they could speak more privately, though with the door left properly open. "My father likes you," Adam said without preamble. "He rarely offers to introduce anyone to his scientific colleagues." "He's not what I expected," Harriet admitted. "Few people see beyond the successful businessman to the curious mind beneath." Adam moved closer, lowering his voice. "Harriet, these past 2 months have been the longest of my life. Every day, I've thought about you, wondering if you'd change your mind, if Moab might reclaim you. Yet here I am," she replied softly. "Here you are." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "Denver has much to offer you professionally: the university, the scientific societies, minds that will value your knowledge. But I want you to know that whatever happens between us, those opportunities remain yours. Your future here doesn't depend on personal developments." The consideration behind his words touched Harriet deeply. "Thank you for that assurance, though I admit those personal developments remain of considerable interest to me." A smile transformed his serious expression. "Do they indeed, Miss Mitchell?" "They do, Mr. Olsen." She matched his formal address while her eyes conveyed much more. "Scientific curiosity demands thorough investigation of promising phenomena." Adam's laugh was warm and genuine. "Then I shall endeavor to prove a worthy subject for your studies." The weeks that followed fulfilled the promise of that first evening. Joseph Olsen introduced Harriet to the Rocky Mountain Geological Society, where her knowledge of the Moab formations generated genuine interest among the primarily male membership. Alina brought her to meetings of the Ladies' Scientific Society, where she found women whose intellectual pursuits matched her own in both seriousness and depth. Adam courted her with proper attention to social conventions while creating opportunities for them to share meaningful conversations. They attended lectures at the university together, explored Denver's cultural offerings, and visited geological sites in the foothills where Harriet could observe new formations firsthand. 2 months after her arrival in Denver, Adam formally asked Dr. Mitchell for permission to court his daughter, a traditional step that acknowledged the seriousness of his intentions. Dr. Mitchell's letter of approval arrived promptly, along with news that he planned to visit Denver in the spring. By Christmas, Harriet had established herself in Denver's scientific community. The university's natural history department had engaged her to catalog specimens from the Southern Territories, providing both income and professional recognition. Her paper on the geological formations of Moab had been accepted for publication in a respected journal, an achievement that would have been nearly impossible had she remained in Utah. On Christmas Eve, the Olsen family hosted a celebration that included Alina, several university colleagues, and other friends who had welcomed Harriet into their circle. As the evening progressed, Adam invited Harriet to step into the conservatory adjacent to the main parlor, still visible to the company, but offering a moment of relative privacy. Among the tropical plants cultivated in the glass-enclosed space, Adam turned to face her, his expression serious yet tender. "Harriet Mitchell," he began, taking her hands in his. "4 months ago you showed me rocks that contain the history of millions of years. Tonight, I'm asking if you'll allow me to be part of your future." From his pocket, he withdrew a small box, opening it to reveal a ring set with a striking blue-green stone surrounded by small diamonds. "Turquoise," he explained as Harriet gasped in surprise. "From a Colorado mine. Not as traditional as a diamond solitaire, perhaps, but I thought a geologist might appreciate something that represents the land that brought us together." Tears filled Harriet's eyes as she looked from the ring to Adam's face. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Harriet Mitchell, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me where your mind is valued as much as your heart, where science and love can flourish together?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, Adam Olsen." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, applause erupted from the doorway where the entire company had gathered, apparently alerted to the impending proposal. Joseph Olsen raised his glass in a toast, his approval evident in his beaming smile. "To my son and his brilliant future wife," he called. "May they discover together all the treasures this world has to offer." Spring brought Dr. Mitchell to Denver for an extended visit, coinciding with preparations for a June wedding. He found his daughter transformed, not fundamentally changed, but flourishing in ways that Moab could never have nurtured. "You were right to come here," he told her as they walked through the university gardens where Harriet now regularly lectured on geological sciences. "I see it in everything about you." "I miss you terribly," Harriet admitted, linking her arm through his. "But this opportunity to have both professional respect and personal happiness, it's more than I ever imagined possible." "Your mother would be so proud, Doctor," Mitchell said, his voice thick with emotion. "She always believed you were meant for extraordinary things." The wedding took place at Denver's Episcopal Church, attended by the city's scientific community alongside the Olsen social circle. Harriet wore a gown of ivory silk with subtle embroidery depicting the mountain landscape around Denver Eliner's gift, created by the city's finest dressmaker. As Dr. Mitchell walked his daughter down the aisle toward Adam, whose face shone with unmistakable love and pride. Harriet reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from a solitary woman collecting rocks in the desert to a respected scientist, marrying a man who had first shown interest by saying, "Show me what you've discovered." Their vows, traditional in form but deeply personal in meaning, echoed through the church. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the applause that erupted seemed to affirm not just their union but the unconventional path that had led to it. The reception at the Olsen home featured both elegant refinement and scientific touches that reflected the couple's shared interests. Each table centerpiece incorporated geological specimens alongside flower arrangements, and guests received small polished stones as mementos. As evening approached, Adam led Harriet away from the celebration toward a surprise he had prepared in the garden. There, a small stone structure stood newly completed, a private laboratory designed specifically for Harriet's ongoing research. "Your wedding gift," Adam explained as he opened the door to reveal a fully equipped space with specimen cabinets, a quality microscope, and large windows providing natural light for her work. "A place where you can continue your discoveries, even as we begin our life together." Tears filled Harriet's eyes as she took in the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to embrace her husband. "Everything about this about us is perfect." "Not perfect," Adam corrected gently, brushing a tear from her cheek, "but perfectly suited to each other." the alignment of elements that creates something stronger than either could be alone. "A scientific observation, Mr. Olsen?" Harriet asked, smiling through her tears. "An observation based on the most compelling evidence I've ever encountered, Mrs. Olsen," he replied, drawing her into a kiss that promised a lifetime of discovery together. In the years that followed, Harriet and Adam Olsen built a life that balanced his ranching responsibilities with her scientific pursuits. Their home became a gathering place for intellectuals, artists, and progressive thinkers in Denver's growing community. Joseph Olsen, whose health steadily improved under his daughter-in-law's attentive care, took pride in introducing Harriet at scientific gatherings as the geologist who captured my son's heart with her mind. When their first child was born, a son they named James, after Harriet's father Adam built a small desk beside Harriet's laboratory workbench. "For when he's old enough to begin his own discoveries," he explained, though they both agreed their child would choose his own path, whatever that might be. Dr. Mitchell eventually retired from his Moab practice and moved to Denver, taking rooms in the Olsen home where he could be close to his growing family while maintaining his independence. His medical knowledge complemented Harriet's scientific work, and together they published several papers on the medicinal properties of regional plants, combining Catherine Mitchell's botanical catalogs with new research. By the time their family expanded to include a daughter, Catherine, and another son, Joseph, Harriet had established herself as one of the West's foremost geological experts. Her catalog of Rocky Mountain formations became a standard reference for mining operations and university studies alike, while her work on prehistoric seas in the Utah desert received international recognition. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Adam surprised Harriet with a journey back to Moab, a sentimental pilgrimage to the place where their story had begun. They stood together on the red cliffs where they had first examined fossils, now with their children eager to make their own discoveries among the ancient rocks. "You ever regret it?" Adam asked as they watched James carefully collecting specimens under his grandfather's supervision. "Leaving here, the choices we've made." Harriet turned to face the man who had first seen her true self when she was just a woman studying rocks when women shouldn't think. "Not for a single moment," she replied, taking his hand. "Some formations take millions of years to create, Adam. But we found something rare in mere days, the recognition of kindred spirits." "Show me what you've discovered," he quoted softly, repeating the words that had changed both their lives years ago. Harriet smiled, gesturing toward their children exploring the landscape with the same curiosity that had driven her own studies. "I discover something new every day," she told him. "And the most valuable discovery of all was that love and science need not be separate pursuits. They can strengthen each other, creating something more enduring than either alone." As the setting sun painted the red rocks in the same golden light that had illuminated their first meeting, Adam drew Harriet close, sealing their decade of shared discovery with a kiss that promised many more years of exploration together of rocks, of science, and of the enduring mystery of two hearts finding their perfect match against all expectations.